Thank you, Chair Connolly. In December 2021, President Biden issued Executive Order 14058, which directs federal agencies to deliver services to the public more effectively, more efficiently, and consistently. And these services that we're talking about include really important things to the American people, like applying for a loan, getting small business counseling, requesting documents like a passport or a Social Security card. Mr. Cavallo, your agency, the Office of Personnel Management, was one of the agencies specifically identified in the executive order, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And how is OPM implementing the requirements of the executive order?
Great, thank you for that question. Yeah, my predecessor, the current federal CIO, had already started OPM on looking at the customer journey. And in fact, we got a head start on that. One of the other keys is, so the first thing you want to do is look at what you're putting your citizens through to be able to work with your agency. How many times do they have to re-enter their name and address and things like that we can all do better on. The second part is having a digital services team. I have hired that team on board to help lead that modernization effort. So we are well on our path. We have a pretty extensive customer journey map now. In my testimony, I highlighted that OPM touches a federal employee from before they become an employee through their employment all the way to their retirement, and we're looking to streamline and improve that interaction.
Great. This actually is a perfect segue into my next question. In the executive order, OPM was tasked, as you just said, with working with other departments, in part because federal agencies and federal employees touch other departments. One of the things specifically mentioned was to creating a more streamlined process for borrowers seeking student loan relief through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Can you share any information about how that process is going, what the streamlined application will look like?
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman. I am not all that familiar with where we are on that status, so I'd like to get back to you with the details on that.
I would appreciate that. And obviously you're just, the Department of Education and other agencies have a role to play here too. But since your testimony, I think encouragingly suggests that OPM is a little bit ahead of the curve compared to other agencies with the executive order, I think it's really important that you bring that expertise to bear on this public service loan forgiveness program. The Biden administration has taken action to expand the eligibility for that program, broadening the type of loans that qualify for forgiveness, automatically enrolling service members and public employees in the program. So thousands of people are on the path to loan forgiveness for the first time, meaning that they're closer to being able to save for retirement, cover the cost of childcare. But the changes to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program are temporary. Borrowers have until October 31st, 2022 to make the necessary changes to their loans that are required for eligibility. So Mr. Cavallo, I would love if you could follow up with me on what you learn about when that streamlined application will be available for borrowers to use, because I don't want to hear that they're only going to have 2 weeks or a month, because people need to get their mail and open their mail and read their email. And even in a streamlined process, it takes time. Is that something you could respond back to me on?
Yes, thank you. We will definitely follow up with you on the status of that.
Great, because we have 9 months to go, and I'd like to give the American people some portion of that to do their part of this process. Thank you so much. I'll now turn to Ms. Harris. How can the FITARA Scorecard accurately measure agency efforts to improve service delivery?
I think that's a very good question. I think that's something that we need to work very closely with you and the subcommittee on. And as well as with OMB to really collaborate on the data that's available publicly, because that's really the main driver for what we can use as a metric, to what extent data is available, whether it's public or not, or if it's and if it's systematic, or if it's something we have to manually collect. So that's something that we'll have to work with you on.
Okay, so you identified two sort of variables there. One is public, and what's public is currently what can go into the FITARA scorecard, only public data. And the other is sort of how easy it is to collect this data on a regular basis. I wanted to ask a little bit more about the public data, because I think using that alone can make it really difficult to measure how well agencies are actually meeting their obligations. Mr. Spires, in your written testimony, you said that non-public data in the scorecard would, quote, provide a more accurate grade of an agency's cybersecurity posture. Can you say a little more about the benefits of using at least some non-public data in future FITARA scorecards?
Yeah, well, thank you. Yes, it was kind of evidenced by some of the discussion we just had about going into a classified setting. Yeah, there's a lot of sensitive data in and around cybersecurity and an agency's posture, and obviously we don't want to have public data that's going to actually endanger an agency in any way. And I think in order to get an effective and a comprehensive score around cybersecurity, we should change that. You know, I know we want to use public data, but I think that's the one area we should really probably open this up and say, probably effective to use some non-public data in arriving at a particular score for cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I think we all agree that that is sensitive information. Congress also receives sensitive information all of the time, and we have a lot of protocols in place to do that. And I think it is important that we think about making sure that Congress has the tools to do effective oversight. Would you say that when you were Chief Information Officer at DHS, that the results of the FITARA scorecard were sometimes at odds with where the agency actually was based on the internal data or the confidential data that you had?
Well, I actually served, I was involved in testifying about FITARA being passed. So I actually had left the agency prior to the scorecard existing. But as someone that's been on the outside looking in and still very involved in these issues, yeah, I think many CIOs feel like they are doing better in some areas, maybe even worse in some areas than what the scorecard is reflecting. You know, as we say, it's difficult, and I know GAO has a difficult challenge here, trying to come up with, and you do too, come up with effective measures that are based on just available data. I would say that some of the, not just my testimony, but some others are saying, hey, let's go after and create some new data when we need to, or gather it in a way that could be more effective in enhancing the scorecard.
And that actually goes to my not quite my last question, but getting there. Ms. Kent, in your time as a federal CIO, which IT related metrics remained the most relevant over time? And then if you could also identify, where do you think, and I'm going to ask Mr. Powner to respond to this too after you, where are there new or updated opportunities for new or updated metrics? I mean, we want to keep things narrow enough that we're motivating the agency to make progress, but we also have to make them broad enough to stay relevant as technology evolves. So can you just give the committee some information about which ones stay really useful over time and where might we need to have a more regular updating process?
I think that some of the categories, so, you know, we used data center kind of as a proxy for modernization, but that specific metric, you know, has now kind of met end of life. And you heard a lot of people talk about modernization. Are there other, it's still a theme. It will be an ongoing theme. Are there other things? The same in cybersecurity. We're using some of the FISMA components as a proxy, but we've talked about, you know, timeliness. So zero trust implementation progress, encryption status, endpoint detection, information sharing. Those may be things that are more timely. And I think as we look at metrics, you just touched on the importance of the customer experience. For agencies to actually understand their progress and for Congress to understand their progress, there is some information that we don't currently collect. And maybe some of it, you know, therefore is not public or doesn't meet the current paradigm. GSA did a survey about citizen perceptions of government websites. There's other places where that information has been done and already published publicly. So maybe there are ways that we can bring those metrics into the scorecard and be creative in the data that we use to do that, so that not only is it more timely, it is reflective of an outside looking in, which is how, particularly in the customer experience area, citizens are judging us.
That's really helpful, especially as we think about making sure this executive order, which doesn't always happen despite best efforts and hard work by people, sometimes the executive orders don't always translate into executive action, and there's a pathway to getting there. And I think one of my passions in Congress, and I think we've all know how passionate my chair is about FITARA, but one of my real passions in Congress is trying to design laws up front with the right amount of oversight built into them. And obviously FITARA is an oversight law, but I think this executive order is a good example of thinking ahead at the time you issue the executive order, of telling agencies how you might be evaluated for the progress you're making on customer experience, not just to say, make a better customer experience, and then mileage will really vary. Mr. Pounder, did you have anything that you wanted to add about sort of balancing competing priorities between existing metrics, new metrics, public data, non-public data, as we think about updating the FITARA scorecard?
Yeah, so a couple of things, Representative Porter. I think it's very important. Your question about service delivery and the customer experience. So it's a major priority with the executive order and the whole bit. The legacy challenges we face on like benefits that citizens expect, it's going to be difficult to really knock it out of the park on a customer experience with some of our back-end legacy systems. So that's where I think the scorecard really needs to evolve to improve the customer experience, address the legacy challenges, but it also addresses, as Representative Lynch mentioned, some of the security vulnerabilities associated with legacy systems. So clearly what we heard in today's hearing is we need to focus on legacy modernization for a number of reasons. The other thing that came out of this hearing, I think, is there's plenty of opportunity to focus on new cyber metrics. I think the administration's focus on the executive order and zero trust. If you look at the tenets of zero trust, like multi-factor authentication, how we encrypt our key traffic, there's a way to measure that stuff and to really progress our cyber posture. And then finally, we have a gap in terms of skilled workforce when it comes to IT and cyber folks. We need to find a way to highlight on the scorecard where we're at with our workforce, what the gap is, and how do we fill that gap. So those are a couple of the key things, but I would say legacy modernization, cyber, and workforce are three things that clearly came out on areas of focus down the road. And I think the panel here, there were a lot of great suggestions on metrics and data that we can pursue. And I just commend this committee for looking at how we evolve the scorecard, because this is the right way to go.
Excellent. And because I really am an equal opportunity questioner today, Ms. Duncan, I just wanted to turn to you in closing and ask, is there anything that you would like to add? Any comments on that modernization, the workforce recruitment issues and how you feel? I mean, Department of Energy is one of the more sort of science-oriented agencies. If you guys are having trouble, I would say it's likely that everybody's having trouble. Any suggestions on how we might measure that workforce pipeline and how agencies are doing it at finding and identifying those staff members?
Representative Porter, thank you for that question. I think we might have to take some thought about how we could measure the pipeline for recruitment. I think, it's very hard to measure the talent pipeline. It's easier to measure sort of the things we're doing to improve the talent pipeline. For example, ensuring that we are looking in the right places to get a diverse talent pool, ensuring that we're providing good pathways into our organizations through internships, through direct hire, and also dealing with the issues where pay is just not in a place to attract folks. I mean, DOE in our labs, we have the ability to work on different pay structures, but that doesn't help me with my federal staff, right? So our labs can do one thing. I have many more constraints in terms of our ability to pay those folks at the market. And so we are looking at those flexibilities as well. So I think it may be easier to get meaningful measurement out of the activities we're taking on to improve the pipeline than measuring the pipeline. We do need to look and make sure we've got a diverse and deep pipeline. But I think the first piece about what are we doing is the most important thing we can do, I think. Thank you.
Excellent. I I think we're ready to wrap up. Ranking Member Heiss, or is there another Republican sitting in? If you want to make a closing statement, I'm happy to recognize you. We all had to go vote, so that's what happened to everybody. We apologize. I'm in my kitchen, so I was able to vote remotely and therefore be able to continue this hearing. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up and close. I want to thank each one of you for your remarks, for your flexibility too, and coming together in one panel so that we could have as much time with you as possible. And thank my colleagues for participating in this important conversation. With that, without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials and to submit additional written questions for the witnesses to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their responses. I ask that witnesses please respond as promptly as you are able. With that, the hearing is adjourned.